everyone! Today we are doing an introduction to functions. The next two videos are all going to be about the different ways to represent a function, but this video is just kind of introduce what is a function and what does that look like. So you can see up at the top, a function is a relation, which means basically just a big set of numbers, in which each input, which is going to be an x value, so we're going to plug in a number for x, has exactly one output or y value. So if I plug in a number 1 and I follow some rule or equation, I'm going to get that same y value out every single time, and that's what makes something a function. So you can see there's a bunch of different ways that we can represent them: equations, tables, graphs, and real-world scenarios. We're going to dive into further in later videos, but right now I just wanted you guys to see the gist of what this looks like. So what we're going to do today is just look at, if you're given an equation, right, this represents a function, it's going to tell us a rule. So for example, this one, if we have a 2 and an x right next to each other with nothing in between, there's really that invisible multiplication sign, which we might already know from algebra. And so this rule that the function wants us to follow is that we are multiplying by 2. So basically, any number, that input we would plug in for x, I'm going to take that and multiply it by 2 to get my y. So we can do that and kind of put this in an input-output table. So if I start with a number -2 and I follow that rule, -2 times 2, right, is going to give me -4. If I plug in 0, right, 0 times 2 is going to give me 0, 2 times 2 is going to give me 4, 4 times 2 is going to give me 8. So you can see it doesn't matter what number I plug in, I'm following that same rule based on the equation, and this is what makes something a function. The cool thing about this, that we just reviewed the coordinate plane, is we can take those x and y values and we can turn them into our ordered pairs that we just practiced graphing. So if I plot that point -2, -4, right, I'm starting at the origin, -2, -4, I get this point. So if I start plotting these points, you will notice that they start to form a straight line. And so I can connect them all together, and this is a way that I can represent that function in a graph. Another example of a function, right, let's say that we have a -2 instead. So again, anytime I've got that number and variable right next to each other, they're always multiplying by each other. So our rule for this second function would be to multiply by -2. So if I take those same numbers I did before, right, -2, but this time I'm going to multiply by -2 instead. So -2 times -2 gives us +4. 0 times anything is still going to be 0. Our 2 gives us -4, and our 4 gives us -8. So now I have a new set of ordered pairs, looking very similar, right? But just those positive and negatives are off. And if I plot those, so that first point, -2, +4, gives me up here, then 0, and then 2, -4. Again, you can see that they form that straight line. And so our positive 2x, right, was going up here. Our -2x is going down there. We'll talk about that again in later videos. But this is just that general idea of what a function looks like and the different ways to represent it. Okay, so let's get me out of the way and we will try one of these together. So let's look at this bottom example down here. If I have the equation y = 1/2, we're thinking about our rule. So if we have a number and a variable right next to each other, again, we're always multiplying. So our rule this time is to multiply by 1/2. So I'm going to take those same input values I've been doing, that -2, 0, 2, and 4, and now we're going to follow this new rule. So if I take -2 times 1/2, well, half of -2 is just -1. Again, if I take 0 times 1/2, 0 times anything is just 0. And then I continue to fill in that chart. So 2 times 1/2 is 1. Half of 4 is going to give us 2. So now I can take, again, these x values and y values and turn them into our new order pairs. So that first one would be -2, -1. Again, we have 0, 0, 2, 1, and then 4, 2. So let's graph this and see what kind of a line it makes. So if we start with -2, -1, again, I'm starting at the origin. I'm going left 2 and down 1. 0, 0 is smack dab in the middle at that origin. 2, 1, we're going 2 to the right and 1 up, and then 4, 2, we are going here. So again, you can see that we are forming this perfect line, and these are all the different ways to represent that function, y = 1/2 x. So hopefully this was a good introduction to our functions. We're getting an idea of all the different ways we can represent them. Now let's go into some more videos to kind of dive deeper into each part of a function. See you next time.